In early 1915, the First World War had ground to a suffocating halt. To break this global deadlock, the Allies devised an imaginative, sweeping strategy far from the mud of the Western Front. The concept was heavily championed by Winston Churchill. His plan was ambitious but clear: force a fleet through the Dardanelles, knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war, and open a vital southern supply route to Russia. The men sailing toward the peninsula carried a contagious, almost romantic optimism. One soldier, observing the distant shores from a transport ship, wrote in his diary that he was watching the incoming war, quote, as from a box at the theater. This watercolor shows the massive guns of the Allied fleet firing on the coastline. British High Command operated on the belief that these offshore barrages would easily shatter the Turkish defenses, leaving a clear path for the infantry. The campaign began as a romanticized imperial adventure, predicated on the promise of a swift and glorious victory. That illusion shattered the moment the boats hit the sand. Due to strong currents and poorly studied, outdated maps, the invading forces landed on the wrong beaches in the dark, forcing them to improvise every movement. The men stumbling out of the landing craft were already at a severe physical disadvantage. Each soldier was weighed down by 88 pounds of loaded gear, struggling through the surf in a blind scramble. Above them loomed a geographical trap. Instead of open terrain, their path was barred by 3 successive ridges of precipitous, deeply scarred ravines, completely tangled with dense scrub. From those heights, the Turkish defenders poured murderous rifle and artillery fire down onto the exposed beaches. The landing zones quickly became choked with men, animals, and supplies jammed against the water. The unforgiving verticality of the terrain pinned the invading force to the water's edge, turning a mobile offensive into a static stalemate. Over the following weeks, the front line solidified into shallow scrapes in the earth. Lacking engineering stores, the men relied on sandbags for cover, often dug in just a few meters away from the enemy. At highly contested positions like Quinn's Post and Steele's Post, the claustrophobic terror was constant. Soldiers lived permanently exposed to highly effective Turkish snipers, where lifting a head above the parapet meant certain death. Everyday survival became a logistical nightmare. In the punishing heat of the Turkish summer, water was chronically scarce, sometimes dwindling to an issue of just a single pint per man per day. Then came the microscopic threats. Plagues of flies and lice swept through the lines, spreading dysentery, enteric fever, and paratyphoid. Soldiers were forced to divide their meager, monotonous rations with the swarming insects. By July, hundreds of men were being evacuated sick every single day. Disease, starvation, and exposure proved to be a far more relentless enemy than Turkish bullets. To break this agonizing stalemate, commanders launched a massive coordinated attack known as the August Offensive. For decades, a historical myth has persisted that during this push, the Allies were only an inch away from victory. This diagram tracks the limits of the Allied supply chain. Even if the infantry had pushed inland, they would have outrun a transport system already struggling to provide basic ammunition and water to the shore. Furthermore, any deep advance would rapidly outpace the guns of the fleet. The subsequent phases of the offensive relied on an unprepared, overworked navy performing impossible feats of coordination with infantry they could no longer see. Evaluated strictly by logistics, the August push was never a near miss. It was an irrefutable failure of planning, doomed to collapse under its own weight long before the first shots were fired. It stands as a textbook case of grand strategic ambition untethered from tactical reality. No amount of individual heroism could overcome the basic physics of supply and terrain. By late 1915, the situation reached a breaking point. Violent winter storms flooded the trenches, causing widespread frostbite and drowning men at their posts. Facing this impasse, Lord Kitchener finally endorsed a full evacuation. Retreating from an enemy entrenched mere meters away carried a catastrophic risk. Planners estimated that a fighting withdrawal would cost the lives of half the remaining force. To prevent a slaughter on the beaches, Australian Lieutenant Colonel Charles Brudenell White designed a brilliant, multi-phased psychological deception campaign to mask the retreat. First, he implemented silent stunts. All Allied artillery, sniping, and rifle fire was suddenly suspended for days at a time. The goal was to condition the Ottoman defenders to view total inactivity from the opposing trenches as perfectly routine. They paired this with visual deceptions to project a stubborn normalcy. Soldiers were ordered to play games of cricket in the open on Shell Green, casually batting and bowling right under falling Ottoman artillery. It is a bitter irony of the Gallipoli campaign that the greatest display of tactical innovation, coordination, and logistical brilliance was dedicated entirely to the act of running away. This schematic shows how they covered their final tracks. Soldiers rigged automated firing mechanisms, allowing water to slowly drip from an upper tin into a lower pan. Once heavy enough, the bottom pan drops and pulls the trigger, maintaining a phantom rate of fire. Behind this ghost army, the real lines were systematically thinned out. Between December 10th and December 20th, 80,000 troops quietly embarked onto transports and vanished into the night. The deception was absolute. The Ottoman forces had no idea the trenches were empty until it was over. The entire withdrawal from Anzac and Suvla was completed without a single fatality. The campaign's failure highlighted the fatal lack of coordination between land and sea forces. These tactical deadlocks and naval shortcomings were studied for decades, eventually providing the blueprint for modern amphibious warfare. Ultimately, the brutal, shared suffering in those narrow cliffside scrapes transcended the military defeat. That collective endurance forged a lasting national consciousness that continues to define Australia, New Zealand, and Turkey today.